Adding colors to your newly completed drawing can be super daunting and complex, but today I want to show you a strategy that is so simple and straightforward, you won't have any more excuses not to color your drawings again. So, how's this possible? How are we going to do this in a way that still looks good? Well, the trick is that you don't really need that many colors. See, I used to think that you had to have tons of different subtle colors in a painting for it to look good. But that simply isn't the case. You just need to have contrast and clear, recognizable shapes. The most impactful characters in the world have simple and easy to read colors. I think the best examples of this are with animated characters like in your favorite anime shows or movies. If you look closely at any of these characters, you can see that each component only has 2 to 3 colors on it at any given point on the screen. So what we're going to do is assign a specific purpose to each one of these colors that applies to any material in any location. Then I'll show you a couple more tips on how to make things look even better. You're going to be surprised at how quickly that you can make your art look a lot more finished and complete. By choosing only 2 to 3 colors per object, you can avoid having an overworked, muddy mess of colors by the end of your illustration. Trust me, I've been there. In the spirit of simplicity, we're just going to use Procreate on my iPad Pro and this iPad case by Moft, the sponsor of this video, but more on them later. So let's say you have your drawing already done. This is one that I finished based off of a separate reference photo, but we're not going to directly adhere to it today. The 2 to 3 colors that I've been talking about correspond to the base color, shadow color, and highlight color, all in order of importance. But before we start picking base colors, it helps to fill in the entire canvas with a color that you think summarizes the entire image. So in this case, I picked a bright orange yellow color inspired by the background from the reference and used it to fill the bottom layer that we made. Remember to set your sketch or drawing layer to the multiply blend mode. We do this first because we're working from big to small. What makes the biggest impact all the way down to what makes the smallest impact? For the next color, we will pick the largest material, most important and or most commonly occurring object in the scene. So for me, it was her and her friend's skin tone. I painted all of these on a separate layer that's above the background layer, but still below our drawing layer. The key is to make sure it looks good on top of our background color, so feel free to adjust the hue, saturation, and brightness tool to adjust it to your liking. After that, we'll move on to the rest. Each item will have its own unique material and therefore will get its own color. You can still tweak the colors like I mentioned before to get them looking right if you don't get it perfectly the first time. So this means her dress, hair, lips, iris, earrings, and nails will all get colored. You can choose to have each one of these on its own layer, but to keep things simple, I usually like to keep them all in one layer. You can also make design changes in this step. I decided that her hair looked better when it was more round at the top, so I colored it that way and then erased and changed the sketch lines at the very end. This also happened with the hair around her neck and how it flowed down, and the thickness of the hands and wrists. With each step, make sure to work cleanly so that the overall painting will technically always look finished. In our case, it should already look like a finished cartoon or comic illustration. So congrats, now your flats are complete and your colors should feel harmonious. Before we go ahead and get started with the shadows, I really want to tell you about Moft. So if you're wondering what makes the latest iPad case from Moft different from all of the others, it's that it's hands down the lightest and best one I've used for creative work. Its unique origami design offers 23 adjustable angles that easily adapt however and wherever you like to work or draw. I use my iPad pretty much every day, so this adds a level of comfort and convenience that significantly boosts my productivity. One of my favorite positions to draw in is the phone reference mode. This helps me save valuable screen real estate without having to use the split screen feature as much for my references in VizRef. I also appreciate the optional pencil holder that also functions as a solid anchor point as I draw and paint at my desk. Its robust design offers a variety of use cases, such as reading, drawing in your lap, or even just drawing at steeper angles. This is actually how I prefer to use it because the higher angles tend to eliminate excessive glare, which is awesome because then I can pick colors more accurately. Because changing the poses is so fast with this, you can also position your iPad to function as a secondary display for your computer on a whim. Then, you could break out a desktop tablet if you need to do some heavier creative work. Over the years, my setup has gotten more and more complex, but I think the best thing for any creative or designer is to remove as many distractions as you can from the creative process. That's why I'm happy to recommend the Moft iPad case because it makes for the lightest creative workstation out there. You'll find a link to the folio in the description along with an exclusive 10% discount code. So getting back to our painting, if you have some doubts, you can create a new layer above your colors but still below your line work, fill it with a light color, and then play with the opacity and blending modes. Sometimes this will help the colors feel more unified. If you find something you like and it works, you can just merge everything down. If you really need some help, you can export the image to a photo effects app. I like PixArt or Ultralight, and you can basically color grade your image there to your ideal vibe. Then you can export the image, bring it back into Procreate, and continue the steps that I'll talk about next in the layer above it. I tend to do this at the very end as well when I'm ready for super fine details. So now let's move on to the next color of importance, color number 2, which is the shadow color. This is going to be what gives everything form. You simply want to create a new layer and then set it to multiply or linear burn. Then pick a color that you imagine the overall shadows in the image to be. This should be a fairly desaturated color, so I went with a really dull yellow. Sometimes pure grayscale colors can work as well. Technically, you could also pick a different shadow color to use for each item, but that really doesn't matter much. I think that the sweet spot is about 2 colors to start out with at least. In this case, I chose an additional medium brown color that worked better on dark elements like her hair and represented the deepest shadows in the image overall. The best places to start with when you're looking at where to paint the shadows are cast shadows. Remember to keep the edges sharp and feel free to use only a single layer for this entire process. You can tweak the shadow color and brightness to match the overall color scheme if you like as well. I imagine that the light source would come from the top leftish direction, so I added shadows for an arm overlap, the shaded area inside her hair, and the shadows cast into the body by her hair and fingers. I also added some detailed shadows to round the lips out a bit more and to define the shape of the nose. I added shadows later for her ears and for major plane changes on her face, such as where the fingers are squeezing her cheeks and on her eyelids. In some lighting scenarios, you actually want to start by covering the entire layer with a shadow color and then erase away at it to create believable shapes of light. This is usually the case if you're painting a dappled lighting scene, for example. At this point, we've honestly done the biggest bulk of the work. We have the colors, we have the lighting, and things are looking really good. This will especially be true if you took the time to create nice aesthetic shapes with your shadows. So the next and final color we can add, color number 3, is technically optional, and that's the highlight color. This is because there will be times where there's so much light in a scene, you still only have 2 colors, the color of the object that's being lit, and then the color of the rest of the object that isn't being lit. So getting back to our painting, if we move on to the highlights, I recommend choosing a color that's lighter than the base color, and then go ahead and tweak it slightly to the cooler side of the color spectrum. It doesn't always have to be the cooler side, but for now, let's just go with this. We will paint these on their own layer, and we'll set that layer to normal above the rest. If you want, you can instead choose to set the layer to screen or soft light, but I prefer to use normal for this step to strengthen the control I have over the values. It also helps strengthen your general understanding of color over time. In some cases, a bright rim light is also necessary, which is good to add at this step, but just be sure not to trace the edge of everything and overdo it. Use a mixture of shapes like triangles with hard edges to design how the rim light looks according to your light source. In some cases, highlights are just reserved to indicate a special quality of a material, like in silky hair or with shiny metals. Now let's move on to the 2 bonus tips I mentioned to take your artwork to the next level super fast. The tools that will help us the most with this are the Smudge Tool and the Airbrush. This is where we'll pick certain shadows and blur their edges to indicate softer forms. For example, I use the Smudge Tool to blend some of the shadows on her palms, nose, and arms to suggest their softness. With the Airbrush, we can also add subtle color variations to our flat colors. The easiest example is to add soft red tones to represent the blood under the surface of the skin, around the joints, cheeks, and nose area. You can also add some freckles in this step as well. Sometimes I like to add an extra color to a few materials like the skin or the lips, and I'll use this color to help transition some of the shadows. Lastly, you can add some super sharp highlights to the eyes, hair, and skin if you want, but be careful though. You still don't want the highlights or anything in it to take up the same amount of space on your canvas as the base color or the shadow color. So that's it. That is honestly how I approach coloring these days, and the only difference is that the better I get, the more I tend to paint on a single layer or two to speed up the process. For example, this is how the first hour and a half looked when I was coloring on my own before creating this tutorial for you guys. So let me know in the comments if this video helped you, or if you have any other questions. And big thanks again to Moft for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out the new dynamic folio with the link in the description. Keep drawing, stay balanced, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.